one of the most robust in terms of theological reflection over the years. There's a lesson, I think, there's many lessons, but the one I want to sort of dive into a little bit here today is one that I learned, you learned, Logan learned, Nolan learned, Juliana is learning, but I suspect each and every one of us, if I were to say, what is the lesson of cause and effect? We could all remember something, couldn't we, when we think of this sort of, it appears to be an absolute truism in this world. You do one thing, and almost for certain, there is some kind of a reaction, there is some kind of a consequence, if you will, something that transpires as a result of that initial cause and effect. So for Juliana, it's cute, you watch it now, for a while there, she didn't realize where noises were coming from, but now she picks up a rattle, and she rattles it. She's like, oh, if I move my hand with that, I can make that noise. And for a while, she didn't realize that picking that up and shaking it is what caused the noise. Modern developmental psychology tells us that kids start to learn cause and effect, believe it or not, around 7 to 8 months of age is when they first start to comprehend this ubiquitous and permanent part of life. We all get it. And truth is, we're really grateful for cause and effect, aren't we? Why are we grateful for cause and effect? Well, because it allows us to learn, and it makes life a little more predictable. And all of us need a little bit of predictability in our lives. We need to know that if we do this, we can assume a certain outcome. And in this passage, believe it or not, and in the Lenten season, cause and effect is kind of an important point. An important point as we think about some really big ideas here in this passage. Some really big theological concepts that Paul begins to work with. What are some of those words that stuck out? Does anybody remember what they were? I know you don't have your Bibles in front of you, but he talks a lot about sin, a lot about death, and a lot about grace, right? And justification. These are some really huge ideas that biblical scholars and theologians have talked about for a long time. And cause and effect is a big part of it. We like these meritocracies. We want to know what people are owed. We quite like this tit for tat, this for that, quid pro quo kind of a life. We like the predictability of it. We like the fact that we sort of know what to expect. This cause and effect reality, though, can be manipulated. Have you ever seen that happen? Have you ever seen somebody manipulate the fact that they know they can elicit something from somebody? We use cause and effect all the time in manipulative ways, if we want to, towards destructive ends. In this passage, Paul wants to clearly articulate the sort of cause and effect ramifications of actions. And we don't need to get into the details as to, sort of the historicity of any of these one stories. What we need to do is get to the bedrock truthfulness of them. And for Paul, there is a truthfulness behind the fact that sin, now we're not talking about lowercase s's, we're talking about like capital S, sin, leads not to death's lowercase d, death, which seems to be a part of the normal rhythm of life and necessary, but sort of the capital D death, like the enemy death. And so there's these capital S sins, and there's this capital D death, and Paul is talking about cause and effect, and Paul wants to really clearly say that there are certain actions, and we call them sins, and those sins lead to death. That's really all and over again in this passage. Paul just repeats that. He says, listen, there are certain actions that lead to death, but don't worry, there's another action that leads to life. So this is cause and effect, one thing leading to the next. I know for me, starting to raise an almost teenager, one of the best ways to help Logan clue into cause and effect is to ask him to explain something for me. Like to sort of recognize what some of the behaviors are doing, and like you can say it all the time, like that's going to lead to this, so like when Logan says to me, I don't want to shower tonight. I don't want to shower. I say, well, there's going to be an effect. You're going to wake up stinkier. You're like a teenager now. You kind of stink. Like, if you don't shower tonight, you're going to wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to go to school, and you're going to be even stinkier. But I can say that all day long. Like, Logan, you're going to stink in the morning. And it's not helpful. I have to ask him to explain to me what are the effects of his choices. And during this Lenten season, when we say no to something, when we say no to whatever that is, we're saying there's a certain activity that we're doing, and there are effects that come from it. And for a season, I want to say no to that because I'm recognizing that maybe some of the effects, some of the things, like I just need some clarity. And when we explain the cause and effect relationship without just engaging in it, we learn the lesson better. Do you guys remember that? Do you remember when somebody asks you to teach something, that you end up learning that thing that you taught better? So whether it's a math thing and the teacher gives you a piece of chalk and you have to go up to the board and you have to write out the equation, you having to teach somebody and to do it helps you understand it. And so I'll ask Logan, what do you think is going to happen if you make that choice? And that's what Paul's asking right now in this passage. There are choices made, and those choices lead to death, and tries to explain it at great lengths. There are choices that lead to dying, and there are choices that lead to life. I can't get into all of the choices. I just want to get into the one choice, the one that sets Christ apart, the one that sets the whole thing apart. And that sort of reverses the whole cause and effect thing, the tit for tat, quid pro quo reality, and that is forgiveness. At the heart of this passage, at the heart of everything that Paul is saying is, listen, there is these offenses that lead to death, but the gift is not like the trespass. How many times did Paul repeat that phrase? Did you guys catch that while Cheryl was reading it? Paul kept saying, yeah. Don't worry. What Jesus did with the gift, it's not like the trespass. It's not like the sin. It's not like death. It's different. So our question becomes, well, what makes what Jesus did different? What makes what Jesus did different? What is so different about that gift? What's so different about grace? So we started this whole sermon thinking about this for that, sort of cause and effect. But forgiveness in the Christian landscape, the act of Christ, was not solicited by a previous activity. So there was nothing that predicated Jesus having to forgive. There was nothing that said, God, you have to love. There was no cause for God's love, is what I'm trying to get at. There was nothing that sort of magically happened in the past, and it therefore created a loving heart of God. The gift is totally different than the regular ways in which we do things. The gift simply existed. God is simply a forgiving God. And so there's no amount of internal calculus that can help us understand what Jesus did. There are times then when that cause and effect reality that most of our life, all of the patterns, we do so much. I tell Juliana all the time, don't go near daddy's oven when daddy's baking bread and it's hot. Like, that's hot. If you touch it, it's going to hurt, cause an effect. But occasionally there's an event, something that happens, and I'm suggesting that today it's forgiveness. Today it is the love of God. It is the heart of God demonstrated to us in Christ. That one act, that one event where Jesus identifies with the deep superabundance of grace. And Jesus says, nothing caused this. I just am forgiving. And it breaks and gives us an entirely new pattern, a better pattern, a hopeful pattern. Because gifts, divine gifts, are not patterned after death and sin. There is a new economy, an economy of grace, and an economy of superabundance. Jesus challenges us to stop the tit-for-tat economy and to enter into the economy of the gospel and of grace. The power of forgiveness to break the cycle of the capital D, death. So, this morning, maybe you need to identify a hurt or an offense in your life. Some point or another where you felt like you needed to go back to that cause and effect economy. Remember the feelings you first experienced with this hurt. And feel them the way you felt them the first time. Notice how the feelings show up in your body. And listen to them. Stop fighting. Stop blaming. Stop critiquing. Stop analyzing. Because critique and analysis and all of that will just lead us to wanting an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Instead, welcome the grief and welcome the anger. But when you do, when we name it, when we feel it, when we welcome it, we might allow the transformation to begin into a new kind of economy, a different economy, one that leaves behind the cycle of cause and effect and enters into forgiveness. So welcome your pain again. You may feel it viscerally all over again. You may feel it as though you're feeling it for the first time. And that's okay, because that's what it means to be human. But it's also what Jesus felt. It's also what it means to be divine. To feel deeply. To hold that immense amount of pain. Because Jesus is holding you through the process. Now, I wonder, what would it be like if you handed all of this pain, yours and the world's, over to God in this Lenten season? What if you let it go? What if the thing you took a break from was your anger? What if the thing you had to let go of was your guilt? I wonder what it would be like this morning if you asked for grace and for forgiveness for the person who hurt you, for the event that offended you, for the reality of suffering in each and every life, for all those small s sins. I can't promise that the pain will leave easily or quickly. And I can certainly tell you that to forgive is not to forget. But letting go frees up a great amount of soul energy, and it liberates a level of life and healing that you didn't know could exist. And so in this passage, and it's been the heart of so many theological treatises, there we go, I think that's the better English word, and many people have wondered what this is all about, and there's so many details to potentially get into. But I think at the heart of it, it points us to the forgiving heart of God. This is the core of who Jesus is. And so I think it's an invitation to mutual apology, healing, and forgiveness. a new kind of economy for humanity. Otherwise, if we stay to the classic sense of this for that, of cause and effect, we'll be controlled by the past. It'll continue to creep up in our hearts. And instead, I invite you to engage and to be healed by God, to be healed by Jesus, to embrace the world of forgiveness and apology. Did you know that fully 2/3 of Jesus' teachings are somehow either directly or indirectly about forgiveness? 2/3. If we don't take forgiveness seriously, we will devolve into bitterness, holding grudges, and the violence that inevitably follows. Forgiveness is to let go of our hope for a different past. We cannot change the past. Reality is what it is, and such acceptance leads to great freedom. And so long as there is both accountability and healing, forgiveness can live. Because the gift is not like the trespass.